did not rule that the policy or relocations were unlawful, but they prohibited the removal of 3 of those on last night's flight. Those prohibitions last for different time periods, but are not an absolute bar on their transfer to Rwanda. Anyone who's been ordered to be released by the courts will be tagged while we continue to progress their relocation. While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. Our domestic courts were of the view that the flight could go ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, the case for our partnership with Rwanda bears repeating. We are a generous and welcoming country, as has been shown time and time again. Over 20,000 people have used safe and legal routes to come to the UK since 2015. And most recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britons have opened their hearts and their homes to Afghan nationals and Ukrainian nationals. But our capacity to help those in need is severely compromised by those who come here illegally, and as we've discussed in this House many, many times, who seek to jump the queue because they can afford to pay the people smugglers. It is illegal. It is not necessary because they are coming from other safe countries. It is not fair either on those who play by the rules or on the British taxpayers who have to foot this bill. We cannot keep on spending nearly £5 million a day on accommodation, including that of hotels. We cannot accept this intolerable pressure on public services and local communities. It makes us less safe as a nation because those who come here illegally do not have the regularised checks or even the regularised status. And because evil people smuggling gangs use the proceeds of their ill-gotten gains to fund other appalling crimes that undermine the security of our country. It is also lethally dangerous for those who are smuggled. People have drowned at sea, suffocated in lorries, and perished crossing territories. The humane, decent and moral response to all of this is simply not to stand by and let people down, or to be sold into slavery, or to be smuggled, but to stop this. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option, or at least not a morally responsible one. This is, as I've said repeatedly, a complex, long-standing problem. The global asylum system is broken, and between 80 to 100 million people are now displaced, and others are on the move, seeking better economic opportunities. And an international problem requires international solutions. The UK and Rwanda have shown the way forward by working together. And this partnership sends a clear message that illegal entry will not be tolerated, Madam Deputy Speaker, while offering a practical, humane way forward for those who arrive to the UK via illegal routes. It has saddened me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to see Rwanda so terribly misrepresented and traduced in recent weeks. It is another example of how all too often critics not only don't know what they're speaking about, but seek to vilify another international country that has a good track record when it comes to refugees and stepping up to international responsibilities. Rwanda, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a safe and secure country with an outstanding track record of supporting refugees and asylum seekers. And indeed, we are proud that we are working together. Proud that the UK is investing in Rwanda and helping that great country to thrive. And proud that those who are relocated to Rwanda will have an opportunity to thrive as well. They will be given generous support, including language skills, vocational training, and help with starting their own businesses or finding employment. But of course, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, the usual suspects, with the blessings of honourable and right honourable members opposite, have set out the thought and even campaign against these efforts, and with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, the will of the British people. It would be wrong to issue a running commentary over ongoing cases, but Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to say this. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals. We will not stand idly by and let organised crime gangs, who are despicable in their nature and their conduct, evil people, treat human beings as cargo. We will not accept that we have no right to control our borders, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will do everything necessary to keep this country safe, and we will continue our long and proud tradition of helping those in genuine need. Now, many of us have met refugees, both abroad and on British soil, and listened to the stories that are quite frankly chilling and heartbreaking. But of course it suits the benches opposite to pretend that this side of the House doesn't care. But Madam Deputy Speaker, as you referred to in the earlier point of order, on this side of the House, such accusations are a grotesque slur. And let me tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is truly chilling is listening to opponents going on about how awful this policy is, while offering no practical solutions, while lives are being lost, helping develop safe and legal routes to this country for those who really need them is absolutely at the heart of this government's work. And having overseen efforts to bring to the UK thousands of people in absolute need, including from Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine. And I am the first to say that controlled immigration is good for our country, outstanding for our country, including that by refugees. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we simply have to focus on the support of those who need it the most, and not those who have picked the UK as a destination over a safe country like France. And it is no use pretending that they are fleeing persecution when they are travelling from a safe country, because our capacity to help is not infinite, and public support for the asylum system will be fatally undermined if we do not act. And along with the critics of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership have no alternative proposal to deal with uncontrolled immigration. And like on so many other issues, the parties opposite, the Labour Party and the SNP, are on the wrong side of the argument, and we will only see with their arguments public trust in the system being corroded. That is irresponsible and utterly indifferent to those who we seek to help and support. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have always said that I will look at all proposals to reduce illegal migration and illegal entry to our country, and even those that the opposite benches might prepare to put forward, but we still wait for them. However, well, he says that. However, fundamentally, they don't think there is a problem, and that is why they don't have a solution, because they still remain and stand for open borders, pure and simple. Meanwhile, this government wants to get on with delivering, not just on what the British people want, but reforming our systems, so yes, so that they are firm, but equally, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that they are fair to those who pay for them and fair on those who need our help and support.
Yeah. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a shambles, and it is shameful, and the Home Secretary has no one but herself to blame. This is not, and never has been, a serious policy, and she knew that when she chartered the plane. She knew that among the people she was planning to send to Rwanda on this plane were torture and trafficking victims. She knew she didn't have a proper screening process in place. She knew that some of them might be children. So can she confirm it was the Home Office itself that withdrew a whole series of these cases on Friday and yesterday because they knew there was a problem with these cases, that even without the European Court of Human Rights judgment, she was planning to send a plane with just 7 people on board because she'd had to withdraw most of the cases at the last minute. She knows that there is a lack of proper asylum capacity in Rwanda to make fair decisions, that as the UNHCR says, they only normally deal with a few hundred cases a year. There's normally only one eligibility officer who prepares the cases, and that's as well as the lack of interpreters or legal advice to ensure fair decisions. Now, she promised there will be extra payments to Rwanda for each person that is transferred, presumably to pay for those extra caseworkers or extra support. But she still refused to tell us How much?
How much?
So what is she hiding? Will she tell us now how much she promised Rwanda for each of the people she was planning to send yesterday, and how many Rwandan refugees she promised to take in return? She knows that serious concerns have been raised about Rwandan restrictions on political freedom, on the treatment of people who are LGBT, on the fact that 12 refugees were shot by the authorities in 2018 for protesting against food cuts, on the fact that there have been Afghan and Syrian asylum seekers returned by Rwanda, and she knows that none of those concerns have been addressed. She knows too that the policy will not work. We need action to tackle dangerous criminal gangs who are putting lives at risk. But she knows that her policies won't achieve that, and that is not their objective. Because if it was, she would not have asked the National Crime Agency, whose job it is to target the criminal gangs, to draw up 20% staff cuts. That is potentially 1,000 people being cut from the organisation that works to tackle the gangs. So can she confirm, has she asked the NCA to draw up plans for staff cuts? If she was serious, she would be taking seriously the fact that the Israel-Rwanda deal ended up increasing criminal people trafficking and smuggling, and that her plan risks making things worse. And if it was, she would be working night and day to get a better joint plan with France to crack down on the gangs and to stop the boats being put into the water in the first place. But she isn't, because her relationship with French ministers has totally broken down. If she was serious about tackling illegal migration, illegal economic migration, or cutting the bills for people in hotels, she would be speeding up Home Office decision-making so refugees can get support and those who aren't can be returned home. Instead, her decisions have totally collapsed from 28,000 a year to just 14,000 decisions a year, fewer than Belgium, the Netherlands, never mind Germany or France. And she's so badly failing to take those basic decisions, she is trying to pay a country thousands of miles away to take decisions for us instead. How shameful does that make us look around the world if our Home Office cannot take those basic decisions? She knew about problem after problem with her policy. She knows this is unworkable, unethical, and won't stop the criminal gangs. But yet she still went ahead and spent £500,000 chartering a plane she never expected to fly. She still went ahead and wrote a £120 million cheque to Rwanda with a promise of more to come. And she still went ahead because all she really cares about is picking fights and finding someone else to blame. This isn't a long-term plan, it is a short-term stunt. Everyone can see it. It's not serious policy, it's shameless posturing, and she knows it. It's not building consensus, it's just pursuing division. It is government by gimmick. It's not in the public interest, it's just in their political interest. And what are they prepared to trash along the way? People's lives, our basic British values of fairness, decency and common sense, and the reputation of our nation. Our country is better than this. We've a long tradition of hard work and stepping up to tackle problems, not to offload them, to tackle the criminal gangs who put lives at risk, and to do right by refugees. That is what she should be doing now, and not this shambles that is putting our country to shame.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I always look forward to these exchanges in the House, it's fair to say. Primarily because, well, perhaps if you'd like to listen to them as well. Let me just respond by saying, as a point of education, if I may, for the Honourable Lady opposite, we're not the only country in the world to be adopting this approach, it's fair to say. The Right Honourable Lady may be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's an approach the EU have adopted through their EU transfer mechanism to Rwanda. And Denmark themselves are in the process, already in the process of looking at this. But she raises a number of points which are also factually incorrect. I'll come to you shortly, if you don't mind. That the purpose of the work that we are doing is absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker, to break the business model of the people smugglers. And it's a shame, actually, that the party opposite, run down the National Crime Agency, because actually, again, actually, calm down, just calm down a second, because actually it's the UK intelligence community that are working together, tackling the people smugglers upstream, along with the way in which we invest in upstream programmes to tackle the people smugglers. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've got more to say on this, of course, because the members opposite keep speaking about asylum seekers that have travelled from Iran, Iraq and other countries. But, of course, they've come from France, Madam Deputy Speaker, a safe country. They haven't come from Iraq, they've come from France. In the same way the lady opposite says they've come from Syria. They've come from France, they've paid people smugglers, and they don't claim that it's immoral to send people back to European countries where their claims can be considered there. It is literally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the logic of the opposition seems to be that Rwanda is a wonderful country, good enough to host international summits and world dignitaries, but not for people to be relocated there, as our global partnership has demonstrated. And they know that people are dying in the Channel, but they simply do not have a single workable solution between them. And they are choosing sides here, while this government is committed to pioneering a way forward. And of course, the party opposite are now clutching at straws when they come to speaking about money. But of course, you cannot put a price on lives that are lost, and we believe in saving lives and breaking the people smuggling model. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to the claims, the legal claims that I think the Honourable Lady was referring to, pre-action protocol, NRM claims, I do not remember the lady opposite, the Shadow Home Secretary, making these points in this sort of synthetic hypothetical rage when she occupied the seat in a previous Labour government where they brought in acts and powers and passed the 1999 Act, the 2002 Act, the 2004 Act, basically to remove people with no legal basis to be in this country. And these are the same powers that we are using to remove individuals with no legal right to be in these countries. And of course, these are exactly the same powers that only recently and again today she was saying that could be used if we hadn't left the EU. And yet again, the Honourable Lady, the party opposite, talks about the policy being unworkable and extortionate, but it can't be both, because clearly we've said from the outset, that this is a partnership based on working with Rwanda. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing more humane than turning a blind eye to those that are being smuggled, not just across the Channel, but also in lorries. And we have a global collective responsibility to work with international partners, which clearly the party opposite have shut the door firmly on doing.
Sir Mike Penning.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say from the outset that I know the Shadow Secretary of State very well, and she's much better than some of those comments that she came out with today. Much better. What I say to the Home Secretary, this country has, and as a child I was in school when people came from Vietnam and from Hong Kong previously and from Africa. But this is different. This Parliament is supreme. Our courts have said this is right. This is what the British people wanted us to do. Control immigration, come across in those boats. So how is it right that this court is overruled all of our courts and this Parliament?
My honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, makes some very, very important points, first of all. He speaks to the generosity of our country, and I stand by that. And I think this government's record speaks very, very strongly in terms of supporting people from Afghanistan, Syria, Hong Kong, Ukraine, and the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that we have supported. And he rightly, Madam Deputy Speaker, speaks about our domestic courts in the same way in which I referred to in my statements. And I think it is important to say that, and to note that the courts have not challenged the legality of our policy. And in fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to take this moment to do something that the party opposites will not do, which is pay tribute to our officials in the Home Office, both in country and here, that have worked on developing the country programme, evidencing the legalities of the policy, but also the way we work with Rwanda, actually, as a country in terms of their own capability and capacity to house people. And these arguments have been challenged in the courts, and they've been well heard in the courts. If I may just make one final point, though, what is concerning, of course, is that our domestic courts have been very, very transparent in their decision-making and the way in which they've communicated their verdicts from the High Court, Supreme Court and also the Court of Appeal, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is concerning, obviously, about the opaque nature in which last night's appeal was conducted by the European Court of Human Rights, in the way in which they informed the UK government around one individual. And of course it's right that we spend time now going back to that court to actually get the grounds upon which they made their decision.
Thank you, spokesperson. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My party continues to deplore this unworkable, illegal and immoral policy, and it does nothing to stop smugglers, and it inflicts serious harm on victims despite the Home Secretary's cloud cuckoo land description of it. So we wholeheartedly welcome the cancellation of this flight, and we condemn the reckless approach that the Home Secretary has taken to taxpayers' money and, more importantly, to the rule of law. And can I take a moment to commend, in fact, the lawyers involved for their incredible work in the face of some utterly inappropriate commentary from the top of government. And can I ask the Home Secretary to tell her colleagues to heed the call from the Law Society and the Bar Council and stop attacks on legal professionals who are simply doing their job. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not the lawyers who caused this flight to be cancelled, nor any court. This flight was stopped because of the stench of yet more government illegality. And even the most ardent supporters of this dreadful policy must recognise that there is, to put it mildly, massive dubiety over its lawfulness. UNHCR, guardians of the Refugee Convention, are clear that it is in breach. So to seek to press ahead before the courts have concluded that issue either way was a reckless waste of taxpayer money and shows again this government's total disregard for the rule of law. So the Home Secretary should call this off now and wait for that court ruling. That is all we are asking in the meantime. And she should start answering the basic questions that we did not get answers to on Monday about oversight, about age assessments, about screening for torture survivors and trafficking victims. This is a dreadful mess. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, inevitably this pitiful policy failure will now wrongly be blamed by the usual suspects in the European Convention on Human Rights. So will the Home Secretary recognise what the Prime Minister previously said about the Convention being a great thing? And will she recognise its importance for devolution, for the Good Friday Agreement, for the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and call off the agitators in her party who want the UK to follow Russia and Belarus through the exit door and onto pariah state status?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, as ever, and I think tone is important, actually, if I may say so in this debate, we respectfully disagree with the honourable gentleman and his party wholeheartedly. And that is, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we've heard throughout the debates on this subject previously, but also on the Nationality and Borders Act as it now is, thanks to the support that we've had from this side of the House to deal with smuggling and trafficking, but actually to change our laws. It's quite clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the party opposite would like to see all removals and all deportations, irrespective of their basis, full stop, and that is obviously their policy, and they would like open borders. But I think it is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I just put on the record, because this is important, that the European Court of Human Rights did not rule that the policy or removals were unlawful. But they actually prohibited the removal of 3 of those on the flight last night. That was at the end. So, and if I may say so, we have asked for that ruling in writing, so we're waiting for that. But those prohibitions are different to the other claims that came up from lawyers very last minute, actually, yesterday. And I think it is also important to recognise that the first ruling then provoked those solicitors involved to then go back to the courts to then apply for more injunctions for the remaining people on the manifest. So I think it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to take an absolutely proportionate and measured approach before all parties opposite start to condemn a policy that actually the courts have not ruled as unlawful.
Natalie Elphick.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last November I stood on Dover's seafront and I mourned 27 people who were drowned in the English Channel. Of those people who'd been travelling in these small boats, these unseaworthy vessels, 7 were women, 1 was a teenager, and 1 was a 7-year-old child. In addition, up to 166 people are feared to have lost their lives or are missing across the Channel. People who were safe already. They were safe in France. Overnight, many of my constituents have got in touch with me. They are anguished at developments that have occurred to stop effective action to tackle the crossings. Can I urge my right honourable friend to continue to do everything possible to bring an end to these dangerous journeys? And can I ask her what representations she has received from the party opposite supporting action to bring these crossings to an end and save lives?
Thank my honourable friend for the very thoughtful way in which she's made her points but also asked her question this afternoon. And in particular, I do want to pay tribute to her and also to her constituents because they're on the front line. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I've spent a great deal of time both in my honourable friend's constituency and with her and with the professionals in her constituency, not just on border force, not just on the front line on the coast, but also her local authority that do a great deal of work when it comes to housing, providing sanctuary, providing support. And I think we should just take this moment to pay tribute to them because it is fair to say. And also I do just want to commend them for the way in which they work with Home Office. If I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, she speaks very, very strongly and powerfully about the lives that have been lost. And it's not just crossing the Channel, and I think this House should recognise this, it's not just crossing the Channel, it's crossing the Mediterranean, it's going through European countries, and sometimes even parts of Africa and the Sahel. And the conditions are absolutely appalling. And that journey that I have just spelt out, whether it's from North Africa, the Sahel, crossing the Mediterranean, going to EU member states, the EU member states are safe countries, and this is the model that we have to break. And it is a fact, actually, and we know this through the intelligence work, through UK intelligence network, that a lot of these gangs are based in European member states. And so, while I can't speak in more detail, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the wider work that's taking place, there's a lot of good cooperation, solid cooperation, actually led by this government, that has spurred action in EU member states to deal with the smuggling gangs and actually to go after the smugglers and make sure that they're prosecuted.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Permanent Secretary refused to sign off the Rwanda policy on the basis of the lack of evidence of value for money for the taxpayer. And it's only the second time in 30 years that the most senior civil servant in the Home Office had to be ordered by the Home Secretary to implement a policy. So in light of those concerns about wasting public money, can the Home Secretary confirm that on top of the payment of £120 million to Rwanda, the taxpayer will also now be picking up the £500,000 cost of the flight last night and all subsequent chartered planes, whether they take off or not, and whether the additional payments to Rwanda for people that they are expecting to arrive will be paid whether or not they actually arrive?
Well, Madam Speaker, if I may say so, first of all, when it came to our accounting officer advice, we should put this away.